Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Wednesday here on ChronoSpeakeasy.com. I'm Paul, joined with Angela.
Hello.
And Chandelier.
Hello.
Chandelier.
So, just a kind of quick recap. I'm still not over the passing of Stan Lee. Hence why we're doing another episode. I don't think of it as like another. I see it as more of a continuation of the discussion, because previously on Wednesday, I was talking with Jay and Rob, and we were kind of talking about our experiences with Stan Lee, our introduction to Stan Lee, and what he did for us. And it didn't seem right to have that conversation without you two. Because you're like founding members of the website and podcast, and so yeah, I wanted to have you guys on because of again, being founding members, also that the impact that Stan Lee's had on your life, and as well as from a comic book retail standpoint. And obviously, as Angela put it, I don't know if it's safe for me to repeat it because I'm white. You called it a certain...
Oh, the color edition?
Yeah, which is true because...
Bigger, blacker.
And technically that is true. I mean, because this is bigger and blacker than the last episode. So yeah, and I know previously when Angela and I were talking about the Stan Lee episode and sort of prepping for everything... it's hard not to talk about race and kind of the comic book relationship with race, or kind of how it kind of ran side by side with some pretty big events in history. And yeah, so I think that was a pretty good rambly intro. So Chandler, why don't you tell me about your experiences with Stan Lee, or I guess your introduction to Stan Lee as far as you can remember?
Sure. I'm sure I've said like multiple times, like on the previous podcast, like I kind of entered the comic book game pretty late in my life. Like I read my first comic book like when I was like 17 or 18, and it's just like I didn't really know at first like who Stan Lee really was. Kind of like my kind of general understanding was like he's like the grandfather of comic books, and like he helped make Marvel like what it was. It wasn't until like later in my adult life where I kind of like realized that he was like a huge the supporter and champion of like diversity in comics, and like being like making sure just like allegories for like racism or being kind of progressive in social issues, and like it's really like important to have that in comics, especially like when you think about he was doing these things like in the 60s and 70s where diversity wasn't like a huge priority for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right.
And like when we're looking back on it now, it's like, he was saying like these things that probably don't mean a lot to us now, but like back then it's meant a lot. And it's like a huge statement to like do these things. So kind of like having that sort of like perspective and kind of like, adjusted for inflation. Like,
yeah,
what he was saying at the time is like very big, profound, and important. And like, I think people really underestimate, I think, or at least like, I feel like people don't really consider how important representation is, and to kind of like have like an allegory for like being black or like being an outsider, like hearing the message like you matter and like you're important, or what you contribute, like it's very important to hear, especially like if you're a kid reading a Stan Lee comic and you see that representation, the diversity, that is important to know.
Sure. So
that makes some sense.
no, all the sense. Yeah.
So you have a slightly different relationship than, say, I would with Stan Lee, because Stan Lee has sort of kind of always been there. Okay. Like I've always kind of noticed Stan Lee. So it's interesting that you came into comic books, like in your late teenage years. So, kind of when you read those stories, rather than being in a kid and being an adult, about how you matter. It sounds like no matter what the age is, it still kind of had that same emotional impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Totally.
That's awesome. And I know, and Angela, I know you've, because your dad read comics, so Stan Lee's kind of been in your...
Yeah, I mean, well, and I didn't really understand until I had seen the movie Mallrats. Funny enough, I was watching Mallrats with much older sisters. So I was watching Mallrats young, and I saw Stan Lee, who made a nice cameo in there, and completely, it was not an age appropriate film. I'm thinking about that now, but I remember being like, oh, I can put a face to this person. And I always thought of Stan Lee as kind of like one would look at like a Susan B. Anthony or like a Malcolm X, or like this is an important person who did something that makes my life easier for it, if that makes sense. Like, like anybody, like the guy, when they invented the wheel, we all are doing a lot better for that, like things, still benefiting from that, and so when, especially as like a woman and a woman of color, those people, especially more recent in our more recent history, those people and their impact is much more profound because I am immediately benefiting from those decisions. And what Stan Lee, and yes, I hold Stan Lee on that pedestal, because he did something that we're still talking about now, and that is race, is talking about how we treat those who are different from us, and what does that mean, what is normal, like these are conversations that need to be had, and it's appropriate because now with the Trump administration and police brutality, Colin Kaepernick, I mean, it is a big conversation. And the thing is, with these kind of conversations, you kind of have to keep having them until we can figure out the best way to move forward. And he was implanting these ideas and these seeds in very young, malleable minds, to help us today. And like, cause yeah, I mean, when did X-Men come out? Was that the 60s?
It's 1963.
Yeah, 63. So these were stories that, my dad was reading. Mm-hmm. I mean, and baby boomers, like they were reading these stories, and my parents are baby boomers, and so they pass these ideas on to us, and that's important. And so when I heard Bill Maher's shitty commentary on Stan Lee's passing, it really made me angry because, Bill Maher I looked at as like a really educated person, and to look at what Stan Lee did and to see it as just like, oh, they inspired people to see a movie. It's like, no, he did a lot more than that. And your inability,
such a minimization of it.
Yeah, and your inability to see that just tells me how ignorant you really are. Right. Especially because he's such like a huge predominant voice for the left. Like it's just like, really, man, come on.
Well,
you're just being an angry old man.
Right. And I mean, he's one of my favorite memes I saw was somebody was photoshopping Bill Maher into a Simpsons clip where the newspaper article is "Old Man Yells at the Sky."
Yes,
and they like Photoshop Bill Maher in there. But I think it's crummy when you think about what Bill Maher is trying to say about Stan Lee's legacy, especially when it comes to literacy. That he inspired people to, I don't know, watch a movie. The comic books were used in such a great way to kind of understand the world around you. And it also kind of, at least for me anyway, it kind of inspired me to kind of work backwards a bit, kind of reading the stories that Stan Lee liked, and that's how you discover classics like, H.G. Wells, Edgar Allan Poe,
well, it's like listening to
Homer's The Odyssey.
It's like listening to an artist that you really, really admire, and then seeing that, oh, they were heavily inspired by the Beatles.
Right, yeah.
And then going and listening to all the Beatles and seeing, okay, what was it in that they saw,
Right. And I think it's such a crime to speak about any art that way. You know?
It's just an extension of like, oh, comics aren't real literature, or like, or comics are for kids. It's just like,
yeah, well, it means
a lot to a lot of people,
right? And he has a comment about, like when are we gonna move on to read big boy books? I'm like, I wouldn't consider Mouse like a comic for kids. That's a pretty big boy book.
Or Persepolis.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot of like, it's like the genre is so diverse, and there's so much like nonfiction comics and like memoirs and like,
right.
I mean, yeah,
telling stories through pictures. I mean, that dates back to the beginning of us as like a species. I mean, you know, I mean, like, you know,
paintings.
exactly. I was gonna borrow a line from M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable, but you know, Samuel L. Jackson's character, Mr. Glass, you know, he talks about how, you know, telling stories through, you know, pictorial form. I mean, that's been from the beginning, and it continues, and it will continue. I mean, that's sort of like the foundation of,
I mean, it's
our society.
It's beautifully represented in film.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the original motion pictures being silent and
Right.
with title cards, and
Yeah.
you know, and we don't look at that as like
Right.
poo poo, you know. I mean, and comics is an art form that is so unique. And I mean, people have written so many articles, and there have been so many studies on it, and of just how unique and brilliant comics are, you know, to human life. And what, it's a third of Japan's printing material is in comic book format. Like, that's like how, you know, if you are learning a new job,
Right.
you get
And-
the manual in comic book form.
And forgive me if I'm wrong, but you know, a lot of adults in Japan read manga.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's normal.
Yeah, it's
So-
very normal.
And I would consider Japan, I don't know, a very advanced society. You know, so the idea that Bill Maher would say,
Flying cars, y'all.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, so for,
Mecca.
right? So for Bill Maher to say that, like, you know, oh, you know, that, you know, kind of like that comic books kind of contributed to Trump being elected and all that. It's like it's not that's not a fair representation when
No.
you look at Japan, who, you know, such a huge population reads manga. You know, they're comics, and so it's like that doesn't really. That analogy just doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't. I mean, and I mean, that we can definitely talk about the politics of it for the entire episode, but I mean, really, I mean, I think with Stanley's passing, I mean, we saw it coming. He'd been pretty sick for the last couple of years. I mean, and I was pretty braced for it. I mean, it's always sad when you lose such an important person, but it makes me look at those figures in my life, you know, that I grew up with, you know, because I felt so blessed to have existed in a time where David Bowie, RuPaul, and Stan Lee were just like
The Trinity.
we're here and just
Yeah.
like walking around and living among us, and I mean, I'm sure that's kind of how my dad felt, you know, when with his icons and people who just like change. I mean, and that you know, we probably don't even know who these people are today, you know, that had done so many profound things for his life. And, you know, Stan Lee, I mean, yeah, I like to shit on Marvel Comics. I do. I like to shit on DC. I like to shit on a lot of things. But
They make it easy.
but they do. But at the end of the day, though, I mean, I have such a profound respect for what he did and what he helped build and create. And I'm excited to hear, like, you know, other stories after his passing that are going to come out, you know, as it does with everybody, because everybody, whenever somebody passes, always crazy stories come out later, and you find out, wait, what, that really happened? I mean, it and I'm excited for that too. And but yeah, I feel like we're doing a huge disservice to let comments like Bill Maher's like just kind of go untouched,
Unchecked.
you know, unchecked. Exactly.
Well, especially to, you know, and kind of bringing up a point that, you know, that Angela and Chandler, you know, that you guys brought up earlier, was about how the message of inclusion, you know, the beauty of diversity, and sort of kind of how, in some ways, they've stood the test of time, and in often ways they've kind of been able to kind of unknowingly change with the times, because, you know, we were discussing earlier about how X-Men being an allegory for, you know, like the civil rights movement. So, you know, that was such a, you know, because that's what we were having to work through in the 60s with, you know, the March from Selma. And so, you know, to kind of go through the civil rights movement in the 60s, and then you kind of hear that in the 80s, 90s, and maybe even before that, the X-Men, while continuing to be, I think, an allegory for civil rights, was also and served as an allegory for the gay community.
Oh yeah.
And I you know, and I find that
Oh, yeah.
that interesting as well, and it's still so applicable. The idea of being born different. Will society accept me? Do I have to keep this a secret? Something that I can't control.
And will my parents still love me?
Right,
Will
like-
they? I mean, the mutants were such a great allegory for all of that. They kind of just embodied and encompassed all of that. And it was great because the mutants, their gifts were so fantastical and so cool. And I mean, it really does, it kind of it plants a seed in your head as like one of the others in this country that, you know, what makes me different is actually like a real blessing, and it is a gift. And you know, it makes me unique, it makes me, you know, special. And because yeah, I mean, fuck, man, like being able to, like, you know, move shit with your mind, being able to like absorb people's fucking energy and like use it, like, you know, that kind of shit. It's like, it's so cool and fantastical. And I think that and I'm sorry, I keep talking about politics in America. I think with America,
but that was the great thing about the comics, though, was
Yeah.
that they always parallel what we were going through as a society.
They did. And you know, and I think the big problem with this country is that, you know, when people look at the melting pot, they want everybody to kind of be the same. And it's like, well, if everybody's the same, then we'll all get along. And it's like, no, but like, you don't want to, you know, you want those different flavors. You want those different textures and experiences, because that, you know, creates a beautiful like dish, you know, it's edible, it's lovely, it's beautiful. You don't want it all just kind of be mush, you know, and boring. And yeah, so I really applauded those. I mean, I don't even know if he understood even himself at the time when he was making this, that how big and beautiful that message was for so many people.
He probably didn't know how big and beautiful it was, but he definitely knew what he was trying to say, because I mean, it doesn't get any plainer than looking at those Stan Lee soapbox, you know, columns you'd see in like in the back of comic books. And I love reading those because so many of the things that he says then is applicable now, about diversity, and, you know, just the inclusion of, you know, everyone, and that kind of embracing our differences, and that, you know, hate can't win. It can only sustain itself for, you know, for so long.
Yeah, and if anybody is like listening to this and kind of rolling their eyes about, like, you know, it's like, oh,
Don't.
just no. I mean, number one thing to help people realize how great diversity is: the fucking food, man. The food. Oh my god. Like, oh, like you could. I mean, come on. You look at like an American food joint. It's boring as hell. It's unseasoned.
Burgers, sandwiches,
yeah,
fries,
burgers.
Caesar
Yeah.
salad.
It's like, oh,
get
yeah.
out of here.
Pretty much. And it's like, oh my god, fucking Ethiopian, Thai food, fucking, oh my god, Thai food is like, oh,
Dim sum.
dim sum. Like the food alone, like this is why you want like more cultures and different people, because the food alone is like worth it.
Yes.
Shit is
Preach.
boring without, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Enjoy your iceberg of lettuce.
Your iceberg of lettuce and just your salt and pepper only.
Burn it down, all of it.
But I mean, and that's applicable to so much too. Like, you look at music, you know, I mean, everything.
Comics, I think that when people immediately think about comics and they're like, oh, it's kids stuff, it's like,
It's grown men wearing underwears over their tights.
That's weird.
yeah, it's like, you guys, I mean, Japan, I think, is a great example of how, like, of what we could have been. Because in the 50s, when comics were deemed more for kids, because before then, adults were reading it too. They had like romantic serials for like adult women, and they, like, you know, and they had like noir and stuff, and they're like, oh, well, this stuff is too violent, and, you know, it's got to be the comics code, like, you know, dumbed it all down for kids, and then adults stopped reading. And if we had kept reading, imagine what comics would be like in this country today. It'd be a lot like how it is in Japan, where it's like everybody's reading.
I think that's kind
the stories. Oh, the stories that were lost.
I think that's sort of our problem, and when I say our, I mean American. Everything is too something. It's too sexy. It's too dark. It's too black. It's too.
We live
violent.
in extremes.
It's too it's just everything
Our
is
culture
too
very extreme.
Our extremism is too much. That is what's extra.
Everything, yeah, seriously. Look at any halftime show. There you go. We're all in extremes. We can't. There's no gray area in anything. We take it too far, or we don't do anything. There's no in between.
Yeah,
wouldn't have it any other way. America,
right? And it's just funny too because comics, much like music and movies, a lot of fingers have been pointed at them for something bad happening. You know? I mean, just look at when the Columbine shootings happened. I remember one of the quote unquote culprits was The Matrix. And
they wore long coats
and
funky shades.
Yeah,
and listening to Marilyn Manson. It's like
honestly though, if that I always loved those arguments, because if that argument was true, we would technically be living in a society of sunshine, rainbows, and puppy dog kisses, because Disney and just the way Disney is saturated, you know what I mean? That's if that's clearly
just ingrained in our minds, the American consciousness.
I know, but going back to Stan Lee, no, I adored what he did for our community and for our culture, and I mean, because he was a huge cultural voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and he, seriously, it's with our generation, we're the elder millennials. Growing up with Captain Planet, we recycle. It's just a part of.
Fun fact: I was Kwame for Halloween this year.
Oh, God, how the fuck did I miss that?
Sorry, I didn't take any pictures because I was weird.
Oh man,
I had the ring. It's great.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah. The other thing that kills me too about the sorry to kind of backstep for a second, the whole Bill Maher comment about inspiring people to go see a movie. Stan Lee also had his Stan Lee Foundation, was just to make sure that kids had access to books.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's sorry. That's something else I wanted to mention that we didn't talk about last time, was that that a lot of the good that Stan Lee did try to do in the world outside of kind of writing these stories. And I know that people sometimes kind of have these stories about, if Stan Lee was being a dick or hard to work for, blah blah blah. It doesn't change my opinion of him, because I just think that just makes him human.
Well, I mean, at least we have so many icons that have passed that we're lucky if we get an icon that just was oh yeah, like David Bowie. Yeah, he lived off of cocaine, peppers, and milk for 2 years. That's I mean, that. Yeah, and I mean, we're just
do you want a thin white Duke? That's how you get a thin white Duke.
But or with Michael Jackson, it's he may or may not have diddled dozens of children at his Neverland ranch. Come on. We are lucky to have an icon pass being he was a little difficult to work with. I'll take it. I'll take it.
I'll take two.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, what's interesting too is you look back at Stan Lee's history, and, he had to do a lot, because I think when I talk to people about Stan Lee, they sort of feel that Stan Lee kind of created everything and was in charge of everything, but that wasn't the case for a while. I mean, Stan Lee was a teenager working for Timely Comics, and he was emptying ashtrays and getting the artists and writers coffee, and when he did, when Martin Goodman, when he let go, when he fired, Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, that put Stan Lee in the ring of kind of being the head guy, and he was 17 at the time, and from that point on, I mean, he was always kind of struggling and battling with Martin Goodman to make sure that the writers were paid well, mm-hmm. and that there were jobs, and a lot of times, Goodman kind of gave Stan Lee the tough task of having to let people go, and that tore Stan Lee apart. So it's kind of interesting to when you kind of try to unravel some of the politics that were happening within the company at the time. Like it's so much more than just, you know, Stan Lee being like I think the version I was here is like, you know, Stan Lee was like, I want to write comics. Boom, there was Marvel, and then there was Spider-Man and the Hulk, and it's like it just
Big bang for comics.
yeah. I mean, there was definitely a lot more kind of blood, you know, sweat and tears.
Well, and he was but even through all the blood, sweat, and tears, he was such a positive voice.
Yeah,
He was such a positive voice, just like Excelsior. Like, he's just like fucking adorable.
Yeah.
He was just fucking adorable, and he was down for anything and down for me. Like, that seems like a great idea, you know. Like it's just like you don't get that level of optimism in artists most of the time. It's
Or corporate America.
it's either super pretentious or just like, yeah, corporate. It's just like very, you know, it's very cynical out there.
and he had a tough upbringing too.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, because I mean, he grew up in, you know, in the Depression, you know, and so it's like, so he didn't grow up at an easy point in time, you know, historically, economically with his family, and I think to come out of that with that optimism even before he got big, because apparently his optimism was a consistent part of Stan Lee's life, like even when he was just emptying the ashtrays, that there was always that positivity, and that's something I've been thinking about lately. It's like, you know what, I mean, if he could be that positive going through that much,
yeah.
I can try to, you know, just be a little bit more positive.
Seriously, especially like I look in the mirror and it's like, oh God, imagine looking like this and living through the Depression. Fuck that.
God.
I don't know. I don't think our listeners
Stop
have
it.
seen like a more modern photo of me, but I am a whole mess of what the fuck.
Yeah.
People look at me, they have no idea what's happening here. I got a fro, and yet I have like a French nose. It's just I'm dark,
Should we
but not
kill
quite
her?
dark. She's we don't know what she is, but she sure as hell isn't white. It's like, but having to do that in the Great Depression, having to deal with that like past like any time before 1989. Fuck that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Black Stone time travel.
Yeah. Hashtag sad truth.
Hashtag sad truth. But yeah, no, so that level of optimism, it just, I don't know. I'm trying to be happier.
Yeah.
Stanley, I mean, definitely taught us a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Just be fucking happier, guys. Be fucking team good times.
So
Smile.
yeah.
Smile.
So let me ask you this. You know, when we were talking about diversity and you know, kind of like the allegories and metaphors that Stan Lee used, did anything that Stan Lee wrote, whether it be X-Men or whatever, did that sort of kind of help your understanding of like where you fit in society, or
I mean, for me, definitely, for all of them, they all kind of had this very similar theme. It's just like being able to find your tribe, find your family, make your family. I had a very, on a personal note, my grandparents were on the racist side and disowned the family, or disowned us, because my white mother married a black man, and so I grew up not having access to aunts and uncles and grandparents and all those nice things that everybody else had, and so I learned at an early age to, you know, family is what you make it, and to be able to see these characters coming from these broken places and finding others like them, and just kind of, you know, because there's strength in unity, and you know, those valuable friendships. I mean, even with the Fantastic Four, I mean, the Fantastic Four, I don't know, definitely taught me a lot about family being what you make it, especially for the Thing, and you know, everybody really sticking to him like glue, because he was having such a hard time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I for me, like watching X-Men, because, and again, disclaimer, I'm a white male. But for me, watching X-Men, it just really taught me to embrace differences, because it's so easy for me growing up, because I see myself in so many movies and stories, the white male protagonist. So it was kind of always easy for me to identify, because I saw myself represented all the time. And with the X-Men, I'm so fortunate that I was introduced to the X-Men when I was, because it just, it taught me to embrace differences, and not to, like, I didn't want to be like the people in the cartoon who were, were anti-mutant, I was like, man, those guys suck. Like, I don't want to be that, like, and I think it just, and it's like, I remember thinking, like, like, oh man, like, if I knew a mutant, like, I would totally be his friend, and
anything, if you find yourself in, like, outside any Capitol building in any, like, city with a sign berating somebody, like, you got to ask yourself some serious questions.
Yeah. Well, but when I marched in the Women's March, and Black Lives Matter was there, and I was, saying Black Lives Matter when I was marching, and I remember just thinking, like, that X-Men had a role in this.
Yeah.
Because it's so encoded in my DNA, and in some ways, like, I always felt different, and by feeling different, it was just because I was surrounded by white people, but I wasn't I wasn't into sports, I wasn't into the Southie things, like, I was like, everybody was like so rough and tumble, and I was like the sensitive, like, poet, like, I was like, I was writing, and I was I was like into art, and like, and being like, oh man, like what, like, I remember loving the Beatles and thinking, like, oh, but what is he really trying to say in Hey Jude? Like, I was always looking for the message underneath. And,
me, intellectual.
Right. Oh no, it aggravated the piss out of everybody around me. Because I would be this little 11-year-old being like, like I made a documentary about what Christmas meant. Like,
you did. It's so cute.
Like,
it's so cute.
I mean, so because I was always I'm
what is Christmas?
But that's the thing. But I was always looking for more than what I was given, more than what's on the outside. And I think a lot of that came from, just identifying with these characters, and that notion of, well, I don't want to be treated like this because I feel different. I wouldn't want to treat somebody who felt different or looked different from me. And that's and because of that, I mean, that's something that I really cherish about Stan Lee, because I got a moral compass from Stan Lee. It wasn't like it was all pow bang boom flashy colors, and cool characters. I mean, I love that too. Like, I love the colors in Jack Kirby's art and Stan Lee's writing, but it's all of that, underneath.
And I loved too that his characters and his stories also had a very profound message of, people who just seek out power are dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's a really important life lesson for everybody.
Oh yeah.
Because we all have that one manager. We all have that one, you know what I mean? Like, there's that one or that one, like, sibling, or that one, that you're just like, ooh, like, because
yeah, and
it's like, that's dangerous,
right? And that's one thing I like about Stan Lee too, is that sometimes the villains don't have costumes or superpowers. Like, obviously with X-Men, it's the mob mentality, or Boulevard Trask, who creates the Sentinels, or Senator Kelly, wanting mutant registration.
But what was great about them too, also, he also showed a deeper empathy too for the villains, because they never it never comes out of a void, ever.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Magneto.
Yeah.
It did not come out of nothing.
Right.
It came out of one of the large-scale human rights issues in like modern history.
Violations.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, but then nothing comes out of a vacuum, and I think, you know, it's funny because I hear a lot of the older generations. Millennials. We've been on the, you know,
the earth for too long.
Yeah, we've. I mean, people have been shitting on millennials for like decades now, and
we're not that bad.
But here's the thing, like how we're all like, oh, we're all such snowflakes, and it's like, oh, and we're the what?
And give me things.
What do they
I
call
don't
us?
want to work.
What do they call us? The pussy generation?
Do they really?
Yeah.
What?
As my voice got so high. Do they really?
That's new information.
No, yeah, the pussy generation, and it's funny because we're not the ones having a fucking meltdown over like, oh, that guy wants to be identified as a woman. We're not having a meltdown over that. They're the ones.
Man wants to kneel.
It's like somebody wants to kneel during the national anthem. We're not the ones having a meltdown about it. We're not the ones having meltdowns at customer service fucking counters and like Target.
You don't want to speak to your manager.
Like, yeah, we never want to speak to your manager. We're cool. We're not the ones
I
having
just
those
want the
meltdowns.
thing fixed. Yeah.
Yeah, we're okay. It's like, oh, if you can get to it, cool. If not, I guess I'll get a new thing. Like, it's not a big deal.
Right.
Basically.
So it's like, are we really like snowflakes? I mean, because it's a lot. Sometimes the path of least resistance is like hurts people, and we don't like to hurt.
It's just not worth it.
other,
I feel
really.
like
I
we're
don't know.
already going through so much. It's like, why are we going to drag this out?
Yeah.
We're all just fighting for our lives.
Yeah, it's like we're all
Yeah.
kind of on the same boat.
Well,
you know?
and I like that even, you know, Stan Lee even created a character for that. That's the beauty of Peter Parker.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You have Peter Parker who was like, just got home from getting his ass kicked by Dr. Octopus and was like, I don't know how I'm going to eat dinner or pay rent or pay Aunt May's medical bills. You know? Peter is literally whoring himself out. He's
Yep.
taking selfies and selling them to newspapers
He was like
to get by.
the first
you know
YouTuber,
what I mean?
the first
Yeah.
extreme
In a
YouTuber.
First
lot of ways.
influencer.
Yeah, and it's something
Doing makeup
Yeah.
tutorials. Like,
And
God.
that's something I like about Spider-Man, especially Stan Lee writing in the beginning, because, you know, while he did learn the harsh lesson of with great power comes great responsibility, it wasn't always altruistic even after the fact. Like, he goes to the Fantastic Four only because he assumes that they pay.
yeah.
And he's like, hey, you know, I got some... I mean, obviously he's doing it to kind of help his Aunt May, but, you know, and then when he finds out that, like, no, this is a volunteer work, Spider-Man's like, all right, peace. Have fun with your volunteering for the good of mankind.
I got bills to pay.
Yeah, he's like, nerds.
When Spider-Man's calling you a nerd, you know
Yeah.
you got problems. But like, yeah, I don't know. I
It's
Like-
the human element in all the characters,
It
I
is.
think. You know, like Hulk. I think kind of always trying to battle your emotions.
well, and with DC, like, you know, don't get me wrong. I mean, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, amazing characters, but they were like so just above and beyond everything. I mean, the Justice League had like, didn't they have like a fucking satellite at one point outside
Yeah.
this? Yeah, they got a fucking
Watchtower.
satellite. They had they had the Watchtower. They had like a fucking like museum looking fucking Smithsonian
It's-
building that
yeah.
they lived in, like their headquarters. Like they were like gods among men. And then with the Marvel heroes and characters that Stan Lee helped create were like literally just everymen type people. And you know what I love?
Shoeboxes with roaches.
I love the most about his characters. They're always like scientists. Well, this scientist, and it's like, yeah,
Reed Richards,
That's
Hank Pym. Hell,
awesome.
even T'Challa.
yeah. They're all
He's a scientist.
They're all science bros, and they're all super nerdy, and they're like, you know, who get these abilities, and these are people who, you know, understand strength for what it really is because they lived so long without it, you know, and it's just, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. It makes
Totally.
sense. Like, Peter Parker was still sciencing. Mm-hmm. He was sciencing it up.
He was. Yeah.
Still broke though.
Still broke, but still interested.
Right.
You know, and
Yeah.
still just like, huh.
And that was the beauty of the Stan Lee characters is that the characters weren't interesting because of the powers. You know, it was like in spite of that. It was like, you know, yeah, you're watching how this person grapples with his power, but also grappling with that, and just like their life was a mess before they got the powers. You know, like it was
The
just
power
like
just enhanced it.
right. They weren't interesting because of the power. I mean, yeah, it's cool to see how they react and what they do with it, but like it still doesn't like it. The powers didn't change a family dynamic. Like if you look at the Fantastic Four, like they would still be bickering either way.
Yeah.
It's just one just happens to turn, you know, burst into flames,
Yeah.
you know, or be invisible.
And also, like how your like powers, you have all these power, but it doesn't always solve your problems.
Yep.
Right. It's true. But if
Which
anything,
is,
it
like,
kind of
important
makes
to
things
know.
worse.
It
Yeah.
makes things worse. Yeah, it's like money.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
Like money, like anything really.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's just what I love about Stan Lee, and, you know, and kind of going back to what we were saying earlier about kind of reading what inspired that person. It's like, you know, all of these writers, these comic book writers we love now, you can see there's an influence from Stan Lee.
Oh yeah.
I'm curious as to who's gonna be like not the new Stan Lee, but like who's gonna kind of like step up and kind of like promote like those like positive messages and like diversity and stuff in the
I
comic
think
book industry.
it's gonna come out in different creators. I think comics now, especially with the more indie market. I mean, there's so many voices.
Oh,
There's so many voices.
I mean, thank God for Image Comics, you know, I mean, that's, you know...
who I mean, back in '92, we never thought we would have said that, but
Yeah. No, but
but now,
Ouches.
I mean,
Yeah.
Image is amazing now. They have so many amazing voices and creators and
Yeah.
creations and just, you know, I think I don't know if we're going to have another icon like him in the comic world, but, I mean, I don't know, but you look at what Kevin Feige's doing with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's different. And I mean, who knows how we're going to look at him 30 years from now? Who knows?
Yeah.
You know, it's just only time will tell. But yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I'm just still so kind of... I'm sort of surprised by how affected I was by Stan Lee passing, to the point where I was kind of dreading doing anything relating to the podcast. It's like, well, I can't do this podcast without you. We couldn't do episodes and not talk about Stan Lee, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought that if I say it out loud, then like in doing this tribute episode, it's real.
Well, and that's what, I mean, I do actually have Bill Maher to thank for wanting to participate in this, because, you know, when with Stan Lee's passing, I thought, you know, I was actually very much at peace with it. I remember one of my coworkers, because I'm like the comic person in my work, because they don't read any of it, she texted me and she's like, Stan Lee is dead, and I'm just like, yeah, you know, we saw it coming. Like, I know. A lot of people are like, oh my god, did you hear? And they just wanted my reaction, and I didn't really have one, because it was like, yeah, I mean, it was time, and I'm you know, he got to pass with his loved ones, and that's like all any of us can really hope for. And I was very much at peace with it, and it wasn't until Bill Maher said what he said that I was like, okay, no, like that I wanted to stand up and like yell at somebody, because just be like, no, you need to recognize.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I'm similar. Like, I wasn't like kind of like I was kind of expecting it. I wasn't like super sad, because like at the same time, like he's gone, but like his influence is like so permeates so much right now, and like it's like his
It
legacy
doesn't feel like he's gone. It doesn't feel like he's
Right,
gone at all.
exactly.
It feels like he's
He's
still
in the
here.
movies, which are going to be going on forever, and like,
Yeah.
you know, it's just like he's always going to be there.
He is.
Oh yeah, totally. I wrote. So originally, because there was some scheduling conflicts with everybody, so I was going to do like a Stan Lee like biography episode, and I wrote it. It's not going to be recorded, because it's just I needed some serious direction, because I just can't I can't stand the sound of my voice. So like having to, which is weird being in a podcast, but I mean, and I'm sure everyone doesn't like their own voice, but it was so hard for me to like,
My voice is perfect. It's beautiful.
yeah, no,
Mine too.
yeah,
Love me.
yeah, yeah, I couldn't do it. because I was just so like, it doesn't sound right, whatever. And I think I've been able to kind of get my point across for the last few episodes. He just kind of talked about his history and what he did for comics. But I did have the last few paragraphs that I did want to read to you guys, if that's okay.
Please, yay!
Better.
So this is what I have for Stan Lee. In a world... No, I'm just kidding. Heroes dreamt of decades ago are finding new generations of loyal followers. While fantastic art, bright colors, and tremendous action all play a role in captivating audiences, there is something similar and more elegant to be found. Crammed in between all the dramatic dialogue balloons and fist-punching, the characters themselves, and who they are despite all their powers that make them so unique, how they juggle work, school, friendship, family, romance, paying the bills, and making sure evil is held at bay. Does it sound familiar? It should, because I'm talking about you, and I'm talking about me. With great power comes great responsibility, Uncle Ben. Say Uncle Ben? I have to go to bed. With great power comes great responsibility, Uncle Ben said to Peter Parker, but really that's Stan Lee talking to all of us. You see, these heroes are not perfect. Despite their square chins and perfect bodies, they are deeply flawed and often wounded characters. Because of that, we identify with them. Feel like you're trapped in an ugly shell that no one will ever love? You're Ben Grimm, the ever-loving thing. Do you feel like you're wrestling with all your emotions that so often take over? You're Bruce Banner, the Hulk. Feel like despite your best efforts you can't do anything right? You're Peter Parker, Spider-Man. So often it's not the hero that makes the character, but the tortured alter ego within. Stan Lee taught us to never give up, to always do what you feel is right. Listen to your heart, and let yourself dream, and that no matter what, never give up. We are heroes facing our demons every day. Maybe your boss is like the Kingpin. Your best friend's the Green Goblin. Your partner is acting like Typhoid Mary. Maybe your depression is like Mastermind. Or your confidence can seem to vanish as quickly as Thanos snapping his fingers. Or your anxiety comes stampeding through like the Rhino. Your own fears, anxieties, and struggles can be like your own rogues gallery, a brotherhood of evil mutants, a never-ending stream of Hydra goons, or a Sinister Six or 6 million. We all have them. We're all the hero in our own story. And Stan Lee, whether you knew it or not, whether I knew it or not, was always cheering us on. He saw the best in us, and because of that, he gave us his best.
Oh, that was really sweet, Paul.
Thank you. I wrote it in crayon.
I got all verklempt towards the end. I was like, I'm gonna cry. I'm not gonna cry. I'm gonna cry.
I'm gonna internalize it and bottle up until I explode later on in life.
Wonderful.
That's a healthy way to, process your feelings.
So that was awesome, Paul.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if that was too over the top, but that portion of my script that was like the kind of the thing I really wanted to share, because I mean I can go on about what he did in 1956, but it's like in the end
this is what he did,
right? And this is all it leads up to, because so many times I saw myself in these characters, as I mentioned, Stan Lee gave me my moral compass, but also kind of gave me coping mechanisms too in a lot of ways. So it's like you may not have a vibranium shield, so what can you use in your life to kind of be like a shield for that?
No, absolutely.
Like you got that gut feeling. Oh, that's my spidey senses tingling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get that with guys that have those lingering smiles at me when I'm walking on the street. And they're just like, hey. And I'm just like, my spidey sense is telling me
to get the fuck
off.
Stranger danger.
Stranger danger. Yeah.
So after reading all of that, we're coming out to that time of the episode where we talk about usually what we've been reading this week, but in honor of Stan Lee, I wanted to ask you guys, what's your favorite thing Stan Lee has done, whether it be a character he created, an issue he wrote, a cameo he made. You know, what's something that stands out when somebody says Stan Lee?
For me, at least, as like a full time gay, the X-Men are a huge like escapist fantasy for me. Just kind of like they're such a colorful group. Like they're like you said earlier, Angela. They choose their own family, they come together, and like just kind of like growing up, there's that fear of ostracization or being disowned by your family, kind of having to hide who you are, and like it was so amazing to see like being different, having this like can be powerful. It can be beautiful. Like I have the power to kind of like decide my situations and not like succumb to them or like feel helpless. And I think that was such like a huge impact on me. So I'm very grateful for the lessons that Stan has taught me.
Aww. Chandler. For me, it's I think with Stan Lee taught me how to connect with people. He taught me how to connect with my dad, and he taught me how to connect with you, Paul. And I have Stan Lee to thank for a lot of the joy and awesome that's in my life. Like the books that I'm into, the movies I watch, all of it really kind of just stems from these ideas that existed in the world that I came into because of him.
Yeah.
And so I have him to thank for a lot of that. So yeah.
Stan the Man Lee. I hope he gets a statue. That would be amazing.
He's got a statue in our hearts. Did I ruin that? Did I just ruin the whole episode?
No, you enhanced it.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just thinking too. There's a great album from the '70s. It's a Spider-Man album, and it's great. I love it. But what really makes it is that Stan Lee narrates in between songs, and it's just awesome. Like it's just
Excelsior.
Yeah, like it's just. I think that was just
love him.
Yeah, and I think even when he was reading it, like you could just hear his excitement, And I love that that he kind of wanted to be the next great American writer, and I feel like he like surpassed that fantasy.
Oh yeah.
Well,
no, he is a great American writer.
Yeah. So, yeah. Wherever you are, Stan, thank you from all of us here at Kronos. You got 2 tribute episodes. Not bad for, a show that nobody listens to.
No, that's not true. Kristen listens to it.
That's true. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
My mom listens to it.
She does.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Thanks, Chandler's mom.
Yeah, thanks, moms. My mom listens sometimes.
My mom doesn't listen.
Oh, my God. This will put her to sleep.
That she would.
I'm pretty sure this might be what she listens to before she goes to sleep. What's going to knock me out?
I just don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's my mom, ladies and gentlemen. Joe Snow.
Yeah, Joe Snow. The one character name she thought she got right.
Yep. From Game of Thrones. She thought she was so excited. She's like, I finally did it.
Context.
She's like, I finally did it. I finally got one of their characters' names right. And this is like in the middle of which they were in like season 4.
Yeah.
And she was like, I got it. Joe Snow.
So close.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, Mom.
You know what we gotta do for a future episode? I would love to get your mom to read a comic and then we talk about it with her on the show.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah.
I know. Like your stepdad expressed some interest doing that a while back. I think that's something we should revisit. Nothing too heavy or lengthy, but like
Meet my in-laws.
yeah, I think that would be pretty hilarious.
Yeah.
It's like I somehow convinced my dad to read Watchmen, which I don't.
That's never gonna happen. I would not. My mom would make it past the first page and be like, "There's too much blood."
No, but
Did
the fact,
he
All the
die?
time.
no, but like if I could somehow get my dad on the show, because my dad has read Preacher, and he's read Watchmen, and he's watched Game of Thrones, and so when you listen to him try to sum up something, it's hilarious because he doesn't keep all the names straight. Like, so he's like, I don't understand why the fucking blue guy doesn't wear clothes. Why do we keep going to the kid reading the pirate comic? I mean, what the fuck is that about? And like, and what's up with the dude with the ink mask? Is he like, why is he homeless? Like,
I think there's just a lot happening here, and I'm just not following any of it.
yeah,
Maybe we should have my mom and your dad do an episode.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
Please.
comedy ensues. But yeah, so gang, thanks for being on the show as always, and of course, listener, thank you for checking us out for another episode. You know the drill. Shoot us some love at WednesdayComicPodcast@gmail.com. We're
Good
on.
for you. You remember that.
I've been doing well for a while. And we got Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Give us some reviews, feedback. I mean, literally anything. We definitely want some feedback.
Or if you want to see Paul do a makeup tutorial as Spider-Man,
Oh, Lord.
that would be just, that'd be amazing. So just drop us a
Quality
line.
content.
No
let
pun
us know.
intended. It being amazing. The amazing.
Well, and I
Spider-
also said drop us a line. Did you like that? Yeah. Yeah, you were Yeah, Domino left. She was sleeping on her laps the entire time until that moment.
She was over it.
She's like, yep.
I'm still waiting for some fan fiction. Remember, we were like, "Hey, write us some fan fiction about like some crazy adventures we had."
Oh my God,
we were gonna
Chris.
read it.
Chris, my sister that I know is listening, should write some fan fiction for us.
Oh my God, yeah. Maybe we're doing inventory at the Avengers Tower. That'd be hilarious.
That would be great.
Yeah, but yeah, give us some feedback, and as always, Excelsior, and enjoy your shows.